food shouldn't be all you can eat. Now, Japanese food. For the book, I went to an all-you-can-eat sushi place. All the raw stuff I can eat, huh? It was $22.95. $22.95 for raw fish. $22.95, you throw this on the grill. $22.95, I can't eat $1 worth. I brought a seal. I put them right under the table. Another plate, please. That seal ate buckets full. The owner thought I was eating it all, though. Got yelled at again. This guy scared me, though. He reminded me of Lord Toranaga from Shogun. Hey, oh! Big boy! Big boy, come here! You eat like free. That's you eat like Free Willy.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Ayn Rand Tuesday, August the 29th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Stuart Varney, My Take, Liz Wheeler, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Rules for Retrogrades. We will have also the You Decide between Fox News and MSNBC, and Ayn Rand's, the last part of Chapter 11 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
I sing. 'Cause I sing. 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 I
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Capitalism is identical with the restraint, or at least irrational tempering, of this irrational impulse. But capitalism is identical with the pursuit of profit and forever renewed profit by means of continuous, rational, capitalistic enterprise. Max Weber. There is no denying the pursuit of profit, of self-interest at the heart of free enterprise, though self-interest entails much more than financial profits in a free and virtuous society. But what also must not be denied is that in one's pursuit of such self-interest, a pursuit so wrongly condemned by the envious or misguided, are the very mechanisms needed to moderate and civilize impulses. Further, that pursuit of self-interest succeeds with tenacity and thoughtfulness, not laziness and apathy.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the liberal? He is the man that seeks consensus. He is subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He's informal and terminally unique. He's childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart Varney.
How did they move him to the side without ending up with President Harris?
Yeah, President Harris would be an absolute disaster for them, I think worse than what they've seen so far. I think as we get closer, you're going to see more and more Democrats start to turn on President Biden.
So this is Stuart Varney interviewing some politician, and the point I'm trying to make here is, again, what is he doing? He's making predictions. This is one of the things you want to listen for when you're listening to any type of talk radio or this kind of television. And listen for people making predictions, because if you're making predictions, you're not making value statements. What he should be saying is not what he predicts will happen, but what should happen. Should President Biden remain in office? Should he run for re-election? Should Vice President Harris run for office? Should she remain as vice president? Those are truly the questions that we want to know. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
This is how you tie up a presidential candidate so he can't campaign. You throw the book at him for any and all perceived offenses. That's what's happening to Donald Trump. The legal calendar looks like deliberate election interference. October 2nd, 2023, this year, Trump's in court in New York facing a civil suit. October 23rd, his election interference case goes to trial in Georgia. January the 15th, 2024, he's the defendant in New York for E. Jean Carroll's second defamation suit. That is also the day of the Iowa caucuses. On Monday, March 4th, 2024, as the primary season gets into full swing, Trump will be on trial in federal court in D.C., and he will be sitting there as long as the trial lasts. The next day, Tuesday, March 5th, that's Super Tuesday. The day when 14 states hold primaries, the day when the nomination is often secured. Trump can't be a part of that. 2 months after the D.C. trial, Trump will again be in the defendant's chair, this time in Florida. May 20th, his federal trial begins in the so-called documents case. The month of May, in a presidential election year, that is prime time for politics, and Trump is in court. This is deliberate. Prosecutors have stretched the law and manipulated the timetable. It is a mess, and the Democrats are happy to see Trump tied up in court, away from the campaign trail. What better way to beat the man they truly hate? What better way to justify Biden's basement strategy? What better way to hide the president's frailty and decline? The second hour of Varney just getting started.
So what? Tell me how you feel about it. What do you feel about it? What do you think about it? Also, talk about the shoulds. Moralize. Is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it a good idea just flat out morally? And is it a good idea tactically? Is this going to be a winning tactic or strategy for the left? But yes, life is objective, but it's experienced and expressed subjectively. So Stuart Varney needs to tell us, if he really wants to have any potency in these my takes, he needs to tell us what he thinks. What does he think? What does he feel about this? And that will make the presentation. Right now, it's just bland. It's like, so what? It's like a news broadcast. Big deal. You tell me that there's a tie-up on the 101, and 5 minutes later, I've forgotten about it. And then Stuart Varney's going to wonder why nobody's motivated. Gee, go figure. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The witness and his subjective testimony. We've seen in recent years a long parade of recanting communists who have testified freely and openly about their pasts. Currently, we have still another kind of parade, the recanting recanters. How are we to know the truth from falsehood in all this morass of conflicting testimony? How are we to prevent ourselves from becoming confused by the contradictory testimony of men and women whose words can influence the course of our nation's actions? How are we to learn to evaluate what they say? Psychologically, how reliable is their testimony, whether friendly or unfriendly? In general, we can say those who are most vituperative in their statements are usually the least reliable. Many of them are men and women who, in the past, adopted a totalitarian ideology out of their own deep sense of inner insecurity. Later, there came a moment when they felt that their chosen ideology had failed them. Though it had held their minds relentlessly imprisoned for a long time, at that point, they were able to throw off the system completely. This they did through a process of inner rearrangement of old observations and convictions. However, what they shed was merely a particular set of rigid ideological rules. Most of them did not shed, along with these rules, their hidden hatreds and early insecurity. They may have given up the political ideology which offered them defenses and justifications, but they retained their resentments. It is extremely common to find such people seeking immediate sanctuary in some other strictly organized institution, because they now see things in a different light. Old facts and concepts acquire a different significance. Yet all the while, the ever-present urge towards self-justification and self-exculpation, which operates in all men, and which in these cases motivated the former allegiance to communism, is at work. Now they must prove their guiltlessness and their loyalty to their newly adopted ideas. Their emotions, now in new garb, are still directed toward the goal of self-justification. In the eyes of the convert, the fresh outlook, this new arrangement of inner demands and of ways of satisfying them, is just as logical and rational as were the former set of expectations and satisfactions. Now he rediscovers several experiences long since past. His former friends become his enemies. Some of them are seen as conspirators, whether they were or not. He himself is unable to distinguish between truth and fantasy, between fact and subjective demand. Consequently, a complete distortion of perceptions and memories may take place. He may misquote his own memories, and the process is for the most part one of which the convert himself is not aware. I remember vividly one example of such behavior during the Second World War. A former Nazi became a courageous member of the anti-Nazi underground. He sought to rectify his past behavior, not only by fighting the Nazis, but also by spreading all kinds of anxiety-provoking rumors about his former friends. By making them appear more cruel, he thought he could show himself more loyal. Similarly, the denials and misstatements that may be made by the convert before the courts or the congressional committees are often not so much conscious falsehoods as they are products of the new inner arrangements. Every accusation of the convert's past may be twisted by him into a new tool for the use in the process of self-justification. Only a few such men have the moral courage to admit that they have made real mistakes in the past. The distance between a white lie and selective forgetting and repressing is often very short. I discovered this for myself while carrying on investigations of resistance members who had been in Nazi hands. I found that it was almost impossible to obtain objective information from them about what they had revealed to the enemy after torture. Reporting upon their enforced betrayal, they immediately colored their stories by white lies and secondary distortions. Depending on their guilt feelings, they either accused themselves too much or found no flaw at all in their behavior.
And that was The Witness and His Subjective Testimony from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Liz Wheeler.
Georgia, we can show this on the screen, killed 4 white. Last month, a black man in Georgia, we can show this on the screen, killed 4 white people in cold blood. And yet you didn't hear about this on the news. Why didn't you hear about this on the news? Well, because it didn't fit with the Democrat narrative. The media, of course, only propagates the Democrat narrative. A black man killing white people doesn't fall in line with the idea that white people in America oppress black people and that black people are so oppressed that they never do any bad things. You never hear.
And so I want to cut it off right there because she basically making my point for me. 2 things. First of all, the way she should have reported this is not black men killed 4 white people. What she should have said was a racist murdered 4 people. Then she goes on to ask a question. Why didn't the media report this? And then she goes on to answer her own question. Wrong. Ask the question, ask any other questions you might have, and leave it at that. If all of the conservatives would do that, they would ask questions, whether you're asking questions of the mainstream media, asking questions of President Biden, ask the question and let it sit there. Do not answer your own question. When you do that, you're helping whoever it is that you're trying to instruct or point your finger at, whatever it is that you're trying to do. I'm not sure what Liz Wheeler is trying to do. Maybe shame the media. Okay, so let's say she's trying to shame the media. She can do it by asking the question, why didn't you report this? A racist killed 4 people in Georgia. And you, of course, name the city, the town, the date that it happened. And say, why didn't you report this? And leave it at that. And when you leave the question like that, then the mainstream media is now under pressure to answer that question. But when you ask the question and then you go ahead and answer it yourself, you're letting the mainstream media off the hook. Please, people, don't be stupid. Back in a minute. Thank you. So today's episode of You Decide is going to be between MSNBC and Fox News about former President Trump's booking in Atlanta. So first up, MSNBC.
A lot of people have noted that one of the important things about this Georgia case, of all the 4 Trump indictments, is that no federal pardon can save Trump from a case that's brought under state law, and that's true. So no President Trump, no any other Republican president can wave a magic pardon wand and make a conviction in this case go away. That's true. Also, he can't be rescued by a Republican governor in Georgia, either Republican Governor Brian Kemp or any other Republican governor that might succeed him. In lots of states, a governor can pardon somebody accused of or convicted of state crimes. But in Georgia, because a previous governor abused that, a governor no longer has that power. So that is one of the notable things about this prosecution as compared to the other three that he's facing. A pardon is not going to save Donald Trump in Georgia. However, knowing that, once this case was well underway and pretty clearly moving toward indictment, Georgia Republicans gave themselves a new power to make this case go away for Donald Trump if they decide to. Not a pardon power, but something in some ways better. A power to remove the prosecutor from her job. This is a new law signed in May by Republican Governor Brian Kemp. They moved up the start date of the law, so it actually goes into effect on October 1st this year. I have to say, with all due respect, all the press about this was totally credulous. Oh, they say this isn't about Fani Willis, so it must not be. It isn't at all about Trump. They say it isn't. It's definitely just coincidence that Georgia Republicans are giving themselves this particular power right now for the first time in the state's history. Well, now it's coming to pass. Trump is now indicted. Trump is facing trial in Fulton County, Georgia, and now, right on cue, Georgia Republicans have this new power they just gave themselves, and sure enough, a Republican state senator in Georgia has just announced that as soon as this new remove the prosecutor law goes into effect in 5 weeks on October 1st, he is going to start proceedings in the Georgia legislature to use this new law, to use this new power to remove Fani Willis from her job. District Attorney Fani Willis said today she wants the trial of Trump and his co-defendants to start in 8 weeks, to start on October 23rd. Well, if Republicans in the Georgia legislature go through with what they say they are planning, that will mean we'll be looking at a Republican effort to remove Fani Willis from her job as prosecutor right as this thing could be going to trial. Now, I should note this new power to remove prosecutors is already being challenged in court in Georgia. Earlier this month, a bipartisan group of DAs from different Georgia counties filed a lawsuit saying this is a power grab. It threatens the independence of the judiciary. The DAs who brought that lawsuit were also prescient about how it would be how it would be used. The DeKalb County District Attorney currently serving DA Sherry Boston. She's one of the prosecutors who brought the lawsuit. She is overtly warning that pro-Trump Republicans would use this law to try to take out Fani Willis and end the Trump prosecution. In fact, Georgia Republicans are already promising that that's what they were going to try to do as of October 1st. As we watch the Trump plane sit on the tarmac and get ready to take off to head back to New Jersey, I want to bring into the conversation Clark Cunningham, who is a professor of law at Georgia State University College of Law. Professor Cunningham, thanks very much for joining us tonight on this historic night, both in Georgia and in the United States.
Glad to be with you this evening.
Let me ask you about what I just described, my understanding about SB 92, this new law that was signed by Brian Kemp in May. A Georgia Republican senator is saying that he plans, as soon as that goes into effect in October, that he will use that new process to start proceedings to get Fani Willis removed as prosecutor. Did I describe that accurately, and do you think they will actually try to do it?
I think that there definitely will be a complaint filed, perhaps more than one, against District Attorney Willis on October 1st or 2nd, which is the date when the new Prosecuting Attorney Qualifications Commission would start accepting complaints. We had an all-day conference here at Georgia State Law School last week, and at the beginning I said I think there's a 100% chance that that's going to happen, and then you reported the probability of that.
If she were to be removed from her job by that process, and again, this is a process for which there's no precedent. This is a new power they have given themselves.
Yes.
So it's never been used before. So we can't say, this is a process that takes a year, or this is a process that usually looks like this. This would be the first time it's ever been used, particularly if they try right away on the day in which the law is effective to start using it. But from the way Georgia law works, can you just tell us, if they're able to do it, if Georgia Republicans are able to remove Fani Willis from her job using this new power, who would replace her?
The Governor Kemp, would fill vacancies. And so this seems to be perhaps the only way the Trump allies could could get rid of District Attorney Willis. There aren't enough votes to impeach her in the General Assembly, and so on. However, I should say that what's being proposed, it would be a pretty serious misuse of this law, and I would hope that the new members of the commission would not themselves allow the commission to be used for political purposes.
And that was MSNBC. And now Fox News.
Joining us now, former President Trump's legal spokeswoman, Alina Hobbs. It's good to see you, Alina. Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. He didn't look happy in that mugshot, I'll say that. And who would be happy? This is now the fourth time that this has happened. This is unprecedented. We've never had a former president ever indicted. We never had a chief political rival of the opposition party ever, treated like this before. You look at the case, let's analyze it from a legal standpoint.
Sure. It's garbage. How about a very plain, simple English standpoint? When you have the president whose sole responsibility is to take care of America, the Constitution, election interference, and make sure that we are the America that I used to know, not the America you and I know now, and he is then prosecuted because he is leading so significantly, frankly, in the polls that he doesn't even need to go on a debate. This is the crisis that we're in as American people. There is no case. Unfortunately, we have library books, Sean. We have bookkeeping because they didn't like the category on the QuickBooks tab that he put on a legal expense. And then we have this, which is him doing his job as the president of the United States, frankly, something we haven't seen for several years since Biden's been in the administration. Yeah. And they're going to try and put him in prison because they can't beat him.
Let's talk about, and by the way, how do you get 4 trials in during a primary season into a general election season? It would be an impossibility from my standpoint.
Right.
Now, in the case of this RICO case, the obligation to prove intent is critical on all of these charges. In other words, that the defendant acted with the intention of committing a crime or a fraud. I would bet every penny I had that if you gave Donald Trump a lie detector test and you asked him whether he believed everything that he was saying, the answer would be 1,000% yes. And yet we have these, historically, we've had other slates of electors brought forward. How did this happen, and how do you prove intent, Greg Jarrett?
Well, I don't think you can in this particular case. Proving a criminal state of mind means that the district attorney has to prove that Donald Trump was aware that what he was doing was unlawful. Everything we know about his conduct leading up to the certification of electors is that he thought he was availing himself properly of the legal process. And Exhibit A, and this is the most exculpatory for the president, is his conversation with the Secretary of State in Georgia, in which he is complaining about ballot irregularities, faulty machines, valid votes that aren't being counted, invalid votes that are being counted, election laws that are being violated, petitions that are being ignored, and in the end, he is demanding a recount and a review, which, by the way, Brad Raffensperger has a duty to do. So he's asking him, do your duty. Fani Willis is misrepresented and lied in an earlier filing about what Donald Trump said, claiming he said, you need to find 11,780 votes. That's not what he said. Read the transcript or listen to the conversation.
It is a long transcript.
Right.
And in that transcript, at times he's talking about there are hundreds of thousands of votes that you guys got wrong.
Right. He is saying, I need to find that many votes because that is my vote deficit. Well, every losing candidate says that, which is why they ask for reviews, recalculations, and recounts. It's perfectly lawful. It is not criminal intent.
All right, Alina, let me ask you this. In the case in Washington, they want to start the trial on January 2nd. Interesting. In Georgia, they want to start on March 4th. Okay, that's a Monday. On Tuesday, the next day, that would be called Super Tuesday, one of the most important primary days for anybody that is running for president. Is there any possible way you foresee that he can run a presidential race, be tried on have four separate trials, and successfully compete, or, did they just take his time away as a candidate, and he's good luck to him, and who cares?
Well, that's exactly right. And quite honestly, Sean, that's not even the full picture. We have Letitia James. Let's not forget her. She's about as sick a ticket as Jack Smith and the rest of them.
Well, she ran on a platform to get one man, Donald Trump, one organization, the Trump organization, and one family, the Trump family.
Right, that's right. So you have DAs and AGs who are now able to come out and say, I want to get Donald Trump and elect me on that cause, and I'm going to do it. Then they do it. So we have October, Letitia James. We have January, E. Jean Carroll. Then we have the criminal indictments. Don't forget those. Those are all by design. So everything is, the judges can't move, they don't want to move, and they want a speedy trial. But they've had years and years and years to investigate these cases, but they didn't bring it until now, and now they need a speedy trial. It's political election interference.
Do you believe that? 2.5 years they waited, real quick.
Oh, absolutely. Now they want the first trial to happen in 2 months. But what Alina just said is really important. It's a violation of the canons of ethics that govern prosecutors to campaign on a promise of putting a specific individual behind bars. Their duty is to see that justice is done, not to gain a conviction based on their own ambitions and desire to advance their career. But that's what Fani Willis has done, Letitia James, as well as Alvin Bragg.
All right. Hey, Sean Hannity.
And that was the Fox News version. And so there you have it. MSNBC versus Fox News on Donald Trump's arraignment. You decide. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, part 3 of chapter 11 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand.
Mr. Cohen mentions that Mr. Rawls rejects the perfectionistic doctrines of Aristotle. Wouldn't you know that? Rawls, by the way, is an American, educated in American universities, but he completed his education in Great Britain at Oxford on a Fulbright fellowship. What is the cause of today's egalitarian trend? For over 200 years, Europe's predominantly altruist, collectivist intellectuals had claimed to be the voice of the people, the champions of the downtrodden, disinherited masses, and of unlimited majority rule. Majority was the omnipotent word of the intellectuals' theology. Majority will and majority welfare were their moral base and political goal, which, they claimed, permitted, vindicated, and justified anything. With varying degrees of consistency, this belief was shared by most of Europe's social thinkers, from Marx to Bentham to John Stuart Mill, whose On Liberty is the most pernicious piece of collectivism ever adopted by suicidal defenders of liberty. In mid-20th century, the intellectuals were traumatized by seeing their axiomatic bedrock disintegrate into thin ice. The concept of majority will collapsed when they saw that the majority was not with them and did not share their ideals. The concept of majority welfare collapsed when they discovered, through the experiences of communist Russia, Nazi Germany, welfare state England, and sundry lesser socialist regimes, that only their hated adversary, the free, selfish, individualistic system of capitalism, is able to benefit the majority of the people, in fact, all of the people. Some intellectuals began to stumble toward the right, a bankrupt right, which had nothing to offer. Some gave up, turning to drugs and astrology. The vanguard, stripped of cover, of respect, of credibility, and of safely popular bromides, began to reveal their hidden motives in the open glare of verbalized theory. The cult of the majority has come to an end among the altruist collectivists. They are not declaring any longer, why shouldn't a minuscule elite of geniuses and millionaires be sacrificed to the broad masses of mankind? They are declaring that the broad masses of mankind should be sacrificed to a minuscule elite, not of gods, kings, or heroes, but of congenital incompetence. They are not declaring that greedy capitalists are exploiting and stifling men of talent. They are declaring that men of talent should not be permitted to function. They are not declaring that capitalism is impeding technological progress. They are declaring that technological progress should be retarded or abolished. They are not deriding the promise of pie in the sky. They are demanding that pie on earth be forbidden. They are not promising to raise men's standard of living. They are proclaiming that it should be lowered. They are not seeking to redistribute wealth. They are seeking to wipe it out. What then remains of their former creed? Only one constant: sacrifice, which they are now preaching openly in the form they had always endorsed secretly. Sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. It is not your wealth that they're after. Theirs is a conspiracy against the mind, which means against life and man. Atlas shrugged. Anyone who proposes to reduce mankind to the level of its lowest specimens cannot claim benevolence as his motive. Anyone who proposes to deprive men of aspiration, ambition, or hope, and sentence them to stagnation for life, cannot claim compassion as his motive. Anyone who proposes to forbid men's progress beyond the limit accessible to a cripple cannot claim love for men as his motive. Anyone who proposes to forbid a genius any achievement which is not of value to a moron cannot claim any motive but envy and hatred. Observe that it has never been possible to preach an evil notion on the basis of reason, of facts, of this earth. The advocates of man-destroying theories have always had to step outside reality, to seek a mystic base or sanction, just as religionists had to invoke the myth of Adam's sin in order to propagate the notion of man's prenatal guilt, just as Kant had to rely on a noumenal world in order to destroy the world that exists, just as Hegel had to call on the absolute idea, and Marx had to call on Hegel, so today, on the grubby scale of our shrinking culture, those who want to deprive man of his right to life are proclaiming the rights of the fetus. And those who want to deny all rights to the man of ability are demanding that he atone for what he did not earn before he was a fetus, and for nature's prenatal unfairness to the Mongolian idiot next door. Observe also that an honest theoretician does not try to present his ideas in the guise of their opposites. But Kant's philosophy is presented as pure reason. Altruism is presented as a doctrine of love. Communism is presented as liberation, and egalitarianism is presented as justice. A quote from Atlas Shrugged. Justice is the recognition of the fact that you cannot fake the character of men as you cannot fake the character of nature. That every man must be judged for what he is and treated accordingly. That to place any other concern higher than justice is to devaluate your moral currency and defraud the good in favor of the evil. And at the bottom of the pit, at the end of that road, the act of moral bankruptcy is to punish men for their virtues and reward them for their vices. Mr. Rawls' book is entitled A Theory of Justice, and yet, curiously enough, Mr. Cohen never mentions Mr. Rawls' definition of justice, which I suspect may not be Mr. Cohen's fault. In Atlas Shrugged, in the sequence dealing with the tunnel catastrophe, I list the train passengers who were philosophically responsible for it, in hierarchical order, from the less guilty to the guiltiest. The last one on the list is a humanitarian who had said, "The men of ability? I do not care what, or if they are made to suffer. They must be penalized in order to support the incompetent. Frankly, I do not care whether this is just or not. I take pride in not caring to grant any justice to the able, where mercy to the needy is concerned." Today, a scientific volume of 607 pages is devoted to claiming that this constitutes justice. In Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, I wrote, "The moral justification of capitalism lies in the fact that it is the only system consonant with man's rational nature, that it protects man's survival qua man, and that its ruling principle is justice. If capitalism and its moral metaphysical base, man's rational nature, are to be destroyed, then it is the concept of justice that has to be destroyed. Apparently, the egalitarians understand this. The utilitarian defenders of capitalism do not." Is a theory of justice likely to be widely read? No. Is it likely to be influential? Yes, precisely for that reason. If you wonder how so grotesquely irrational a philosophy as Kant's came to dominate Western culture, you are now witnessing an attempt to repeat that process. Mr. Rawls is a disciple of Kant, philosophically and psycho-epistemologically. Kant originated the technique required to sell irrational notions to the men of a skeptical, cynical age who have formally rejected mysticism without grasping the rudiments of rationality. The technique is as follows. If you want to propagate an outrageously evil idea based on traditionally accepted doctrines, your conclusion must be brazenly clear, but your proof unintelligible. Your proof must be so tangled a mess that it will paralyze a reader's critical faculty. A mess of evasions, equivocations, obfuscations, circumlocutions, non sequiturs, endless sentences leading nowhere, irrelevant side issues, clauses, subclauses, and sub-subclauses, a meticulously lengthy proving of the obvious, and big chunks of the arbitrary thrown in as self-evident, erudite references to science, to pseudosciences, to the never-to-be sciences, to the untraceable and the unprovable, all of it resting on a zero, the absence of definitions. I offer in evidence the critique of pure reason. Mr. Cohen gives some indications that such is the style of Mr. Rawls' book, e.g., the boldness and simplicity of Rawls's formulations depend on a considered but questionable looseness in his understanding of some fundamental political concepts. Considered means deliberate. Like any overt school of mysticism, a movement seeking to achieve a vicious goal has to invoke the higher mysteries of an incomprehensible authority. An unread and unreadable book serves this purpose. It does not count on men's intelligence, but on their weaknesses, pretensions, and fears. It is not a tool of enlightenment, but of intellectual intimidation. It is not aimed at the reader's understanding, but at his inferiority complex. An intelligent man will reject such a book with contemptuous indignation, refusing to waste his time on untangling what he perceives to be gibberish, which is part of the book's technique. The man able to refute its arguments will not, unless he has the endurance of an elephant and the patience of a martyr. A young man of average intelligence, particularly a student of philosophy or of political science, under a barrage of authoritative pronouncements acclaiming the book as scholarly, significant, profound, will take the blame for his failure to understand. More often than not, he will assume that the book's theory has been scientifically proved, and that he alone is unable to grasp it. Anxious, above all, to hide his inability, he will profess agreement, and the less his understanding, the louder his agreement, while the rest of the class are going through the same mental process. Most of them will accept the book's doctrine, reluctantly and uneasily, and lose their intellectual integrity, condemning themselves to a chronic fog of approximation, uncertainty, self-doubt. Some will give up the intellect, particularly philosophy, and turn belligerently into pragmatic, anti-intellectual Babbitts. A few will see through the game and scramble eagerly for the driver's seat on the bandwagon, grasping the possibilities of a road to the mentally unearned. Within a few years of the book's publications, commentators will begin to fill libraries with works analyzing, clarifying, and interpreting its mysteries. Their notions will spread all over the academic map, ranging from the appeasers, who will try to soften the book's meaning, to the glamorizers, who will ascribe to it nothing worse than their own pet inanities, to the compromisers, who will try to reconcile its theory with its exact opposite, to the avant-garde, who will spell out and demand the acceptance of its logical consequences. The contradictory, antithetical nature of such interpretations will be ascribed to the book's profundity, particularly by those who function on the motto, "If I don't understand it, it's deep." The students will believe that the professors know the proof of the book's theory. The professors will believe that the commentators know it. The commentators will believe that the author knows it. And the author will be alone to know that no proof exists and that none was offered. Within a generation, the number of commentaries will have grown to such proportions that the original book will be accepted as a subject of philosophical specialization, requiring a lifetime of study. And any refutation of the book's theory will be ignored or rejected, if unaccompanied by a full discussion of the theories of all the commentators, a task which no one will be able to undertake. This is the process by which Kant and Hegel acquired their dominance. Many professors of philosophy today have no idea of what Kant actually said, and no one has ever read Hegel, even though many have looked at every word on his every page. This process has already begun in regard to Mr. Rawls's book, in the form of such manifestations as Mr. Peregrine Worsthorne's The New Inequality. But the process is being forced by PR techniques. It is being pushed artificially, and in the wrong direction, toward the popular press and the man in the street, who in this country is the least likely prospect for the role of sucker. Furthermore, Mr. Rawls is not in Kant's league. He is a politically oriented lightweight, who has scrambled together the worst of the old philosophic traditions, adding nothing new. His two outstanding points of similarity to Kant are the method and the motive. The danger lies in the cultural similarity of Kant's time and ours. An age ruled by skepticism and cynicism can be swayed by anyone, even Mr. Rawls. There is no intellectual opposition to anything today, as there was none to Kant. Kant's opponents were men who shared all his fundamental premises, particularly altruism and mysticism, and merely engaged in nitpicking, thus hastening his victory. Today, the utilitarians, the religionists, and sundry other conservatives share all of Mr. Rawls's fundamental premises, particularly altruism. If his book does not make them see the nature of altruism and its logical consequences, if it doesn't make them realize that altruism is the destroyer of man, and of reason, justice, morality, civilization, then nothing will. When and if they get Mr. Rawls's world, they will have deserved it. So will the practical men whose lard-encrusted souls feel that ideas are innocuous playthings to be left to impractical intellectuals, and that any idea can be circumvented by making a deal with the government. But it is only by default, by intellectual default, that theories such as Kant's or Rawls can win. An intransigent, rational opposition could have stopped Kant in his time. Rawls is easier to defeat, particularly in this country, which is the living monument to a diametrically opposite philosophy. He would have had a better chance in Europe. If there is any spirit of rebellion on American campuses and elsewhere, here is an evil to rebel against, to rebel intellectually, righteously, intransigently. Any hint, touch, smell, or trial balloon of a theory of justice, and of the egalitarian movement. If rational men do not rebel, the egalitarians will succeed. Succeed in establishing a world of shoddy equality and brotherly stagnation? No. But this is not their purpose. Just as Kant's purpose was to corrupt and paralyze man's mind, so the egalitarians' purpose is to shackle and paralyze the men of ability, even at the price of destroying the world. If you wish to know the actual motive behind the egalitarians' theories, behind all their maudlin slogans, mawkish pleas, and ponderous volumes of verbal rat traps, if you wish to grasp the enormity of the smallness of spirit for the sake of which they seek to immolate mankind, it can be presented in a few lines. From Atlas Shrugged. When a man thinks he's good, that's when he's rotten. Pride is the worst of all sins, no matter what he's done. But if a man knows that what he's done is good, then he ought to apologize for it. To whom? To those who haven't done it.
And that was the end of Chapter 11 of Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.